Welcome, everyone. Sorry, I lose my voice. Happy Thursday. Thank you for joining today. Let me know that you're here by just dropping in the chat where you're listening from. Maybe you can drop in a comment or two. Let me know that I am live and that you're listening. All right. Well, thank you for joining today. Let me know where you're listening in from by dropping it in the chat where you are. I am really excited to be having this conversation with you today about Marianismo and leadership because I think it's one that we do not have enough. But before we dive into that conversation, I just want to thank you for being here today. I know that you have a lot on your plate. You're juggling multiple responsibilities. If you're anything like me, my kids just finished school. So, there's the kids are home for the summer, there's work, caretaking, responsibilities, and so many other things. And so I'm just really grateful that you've chosen to spend the next half hour with me. My goal is to really introduce you to Marianismo, to talk about its prevalence in our culture, to share a couple of examples, 2 or 3 examples of what it looks like and some of the challenges that it can present, and then to provide some recommendations or strategies for you as Latina leaders as it relates to Marianismo. I'm going to save some time at the end for any questions that you might have. And I also want to encourage you to engage in the chat, but also to connect with each other. If you're here, you're probably a high-achieving Latina who's growth mindset-oriented, who's a lifelong learner, wants to build her community and expand her personal brand. So make sure to connect with each other as well, because I know that there's nothing more that there's nothing more that I love than building comunidad. And if you want to share this with other folks, you can hit the blue arrow button, and then you can message any of your amigas or compañeras, or you can also just tag them in the comments to keep it simple. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ruby Garcia. I'm a leadership coach and hypnotherapist for high-achieving first-gen Latinas. I help you increase your visibility, your confidence and influence so that you can make greater impact in your communities, in your families, and in your organizations. And if you want to know more about me and my work, feel free to check out my LinkedIn. So today's session is specifically for high-achieving Latinas. So drop in the chat Latina if you can relate to any of these, or if you've ever wondered this. Why am I so afraid to speak up? Why do I have such a difficult time holding boundaries? Why is it so hard to ask for help? Why do I have perfectionist tendencies? Why do I tolerate putting up with abuse or tóxico? Why do I feel guilty for wanting time to myself? Why do I feel like I constantly have to prove myself? Why do I feel torn in between 2 cultures? And why am I good at advocating for everyone else's needs, but not my own? Let me know by dropping Latina if you can relate to any of those statements. All right, let's see here. So, and it's okay if you don't want to publicly announce it, but all these questions can actually be traced back to Marianismo. So some of you might be familiar with the term, some of you might not, but probably would recognize it if you saw it. So let's start off with just defining what is Marianismo. Marianismo is a cultural value that's deeply rooted in Latin American cultures, stemming from Catholicism and the church. And it defines the ideal role of a woman as pious, chaste, and self-sacrificial, which is modeled after the perfection of the Virgin Mary or La Virgen. So if you've ever wondered why you're struggling with those perfectionist tendencies, this is probably part of that reason. While there are positive aspects of Marianismo, things like being nurturing or compassionate, empathetic, being devoted, it can also really present challenges for us as Latina leaders, especially when it comes in the context of self-advocacy or boundary setting. And this term of Marianismo was actually first coined in 1973 by a political scientist named Evelyn Stevens, who wrote an essay called Marianismo, the Other Face of Machismo. And it was in direct response to machismo. And so this is really important to understand, is that Marianismo cannot exist without machismo and vice versa. So it's all about being la mujer buena, la niña buena, the good girl. It's a value system that really is based on submission, in which the more self-sacrificing you are, the more honored and revered you become. And I really want to stop and pause, because it's important to really notice that a lot of our cultural beliefs live in our unconscious mind. So because of that, these thoughts and belief systems often go unnoticed, unchecked, and run on autopilot. So it's just our default way of being. So what does it look like, and what are some of the challenges that are associated with it? So one of my roles as a coach is also as a facilitator of a Latina leadership program. And one of the sessions that I've covered is work-life integration. And it never, ever fails, never fails that the conversation will always take a turn, and it ends up on being a discussion on the importance of boundary setting as it pertains to being an effective leader. But we know that boundaries also impact women at home and with our families and even with our extended families. And all the women in this leadership program are highly educated. They're respected professionals in their workplaces. They're influential leaders in their communities. They just permeate. And I mean, they permeate with power. And yet, I just noticed the discomfort and difficulty that they experienced when it came to setting boundaries or saying no. In fact, it became such a topic of conversation that I even created a worksheet with 25 ways to say no nicely, because for so many women, no wasn't a word they felt comfortable saying, or they associated it as not being nice, or that, it was almost like bad to say no. And so one of the things that I really work on with my coaching clients is to unpack some of these narratives. And one practice that I encourage them to take on is to actually see how many times they can say no. And we start small, but if you haven't developed that boundary setting skill, it does take practice. It's a big joke with my sister because now she calls me the boundary queen, because it was something that I had a really difficult time doing. Growing up, I would pretty much say that I had probably no boundaries. But as I got older, I realized the importance, and I was doing a lot of kind of healing work and self-reflection work. And so now it's a muscle that I've really developed and comes very easily to me. And as women, I think that's the case for most of us, is that we're conditioned to to be the caretakers, to play nice, to put everyone else's needs before our own. And even in my own life, I can completely relate to that. When I went through my coach training program 10 years ago, I was not learning just how to coach, but I was also being coached at the same time. And I remember I was asked during the coach training program, we all had to kind of take turns and get up and talk about what we wanted to create over the next year of our coaching, not as becoming a coach, but our own personal goals. And everything that I wanted to do was for my family, for my community. And that's, and I was asked again, well, what is it that you want? I said, I just told you what I wanted. And the coach said, no, you've told me what you've wanted for everyone else. You've told me what you've wanted for your family, your community, like the organizations that you're involved in. But what is it that you want? And I remember just looking at her so confused. I'm like, I don't understand. What do you mean? What do I want? And I was just confused because I was actually so disconnected from myself that I didn't actually know what I wanted. And I was just used to putting everyone else's needs and wants before my own, that I had really lost sight of what it was that I wanted. And I don't know, maybe there are some of you that can relate to that. And that is kind of one of the symptoms of Marianismo, and that's putting everyone else's needs before your own. And then there's another example that I want to give. I was giving a presentation last year to an ERG, and we were talking about values. And I remember specifically at the time we were talking about the values of humility, and which is more of a traditional traditional Latino value. And then we were talking about self-advocacy on the flip side. And there was a very seasoned leader who was in the group. And she bravely shared her struggle with being able to advocate for herself. And she got really vulnerable. I mean, it was kind of a powerful moment as she shared her story. And she said, I am so good at advocating for my team. I take care of them. I make sure to be telling them to take up space, to voice what they're doing. I'll go above and beyond for them. But when it comes to myself, I just find it really challenging. And she shared how she was just taught to always put others first, how to be humble, to be selfless. And that deeply influenced her leadership style. And it's beautiful because she was a leader that was cultivating other leaders. But on the flip side, she also made the confession that she had really was uncomfortable with making her own needs a priority or allowing herself to step into the spotlight. And it was really a powerful moment. And you could kind of see that she had this revelation in that moment. And it became a really big aha moment for her. And I'm pretty certain for others that were also listening in at the time or in the room at the time. Because she really became aware of a couple things. She realized the discomfort she felt in being recognized. Two, she recognized that instead of advocating for herself, she was silencing herself. And three, she started to see how she was limiting her own opportunities. And that's one of the most significant challenges Marianismo poses for Latina leaders is the prioritization of self-sacrifice and self-silencing over self-advocacy. And she was willing to make sure that everyone else was taking up space and being recognized, but then she was kind of staying invisible and staying in the background. And the challenge with this is that, not only does it become difficult to self-advocate, but it also becomes difficult to set boundaries. And then when you're constantly putting everyone else's needs and wants before your own, you start to either A, feel guilty for prioritizing yourself, or B, you start to feel resentful for not honoring your own needs. Another short example is kind of what I see a lot of Latinas face is the challenge of balancing our cultural and family obligations. And sometimes it's not necessarily with our work that we need to create boundaries with, but with our families. And it might not just be our immediate families, but it also might be our extended families, our tios, our primos, partners, or siblings, which is even an extended family. And so I don't know about you, but have you ever tried telling your family or tried putting a boundary in the sand, or telling me you can't do something because of work? And I'll give you an example here. I know of a very, very successful powerhouse. I'm telling you, powerhouse Latina, with multiple degrees and very high, profession, who's really excelling. And she feels like she has to hide her volunteer work because of what her husband will say. And that's the pressure that some of us have. And it can really lead to guilt. It can lead to like internal conflicts, mental health issues, and even physical issues. And there has been a direct correlation between Marianismo and self-silencing. And there are some studies out there, and I can share some links to them if you're interested in them. But I know Time Magazine, even though this wasn't directly towards Latinas, in this article last year, they published an article called Self-Silencing is Making Women Sick. And what they said was that today, women account for almost 80% of autoimmune diseases. We are at a higher risk of suffering from chronic pain, insomnia. I always destroy this. Fibromyalgia, long-term COVID, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines, and we're twice as likely as men to die after a heart attack. We, as women, experience depression, anxiety, and PTSD is twice the rates as men, and face a 9-fold higher prevalence of anorexia, which, by the way, is the deadliest of all mental health disorders. I just want you to sit with that. Self-silencing is literally making women sick. And it's not just that we're staying quiet, because it's more than that. It's that we're also self-abandoning, meaning we're neglecting our own needs and wants in order to meet the needs of others. And one of the things is not only being a coach, but a hypnotherapist, that I've learned is that there is a really strong connection between your mind and body. And science every day is coming out with more and more evidence proving this theory. Our cells actually eavesdrop on our thoughts and on our self-talk. So I cannot stress enough the importance of being mindful of our internal conversations. So, and again, like going back to the beginning of this conversation, that's why it's important to know that most of our cultural beliefs actually live in our unconscious or subconscious mind. And that is why it's so imperative to look beneath the iceberg, right? Because when we bring belief systems to the conscious mind, even by having conversations like what we're doing now, then we can start to examine our belief systems. We can start to take notice of the patterns and make empowered choices based on our commitments, our vision, our goals, who we want to be in this world, but from an empowered place. And this means we can start asking ourselves, am I doing this because I have to, out of obligation and duty? Or am I doing this out of choice, as in I get to do this? And that's why I love hypnosis and use it as a tool in coaching sometimes, because there are times when we have beliefs and patterns that are so deeply ingrained, and we have to get to the root belief, pull that out, and plant a new belief system that's going to be more important, empowering, and supportive of what we want going forward. So I want to emphasize something because, I've kind of been talking about the dark side, so to speak, of Marianismo. But the important thing to realize is that Marianismo isn't necessarily or any cultural value. It's not that it's good or bad or right or wrong or either or. There is a huge opportunity that Marianismo can present on the light side of it, right? So we can embrace Marianismo and the nurturing aspects of this value. It can help us to create supportive work environments where others feel valued, where we can create a sense of belonging on our team. As Latinas, we have a natural inclination towards empathy and collaboration and effective communication. And that can really be great for building strong teams and promoting trust. We prioritize relationships. We're inclusive. We like to make sure that everyone is included and everyone is thriving. But that also means us too, right? We should be thriving as well. So I want to make a couple recommendations in order to navigate some of these challenges and opportunities that are presented through Marianismo. And one is to cultivate self-awareness. So just like start by reflecting on your personal identity, your values, some of your goals, and start to look at what are some of your strengths? What are areas of opportunity? Start noticing where is Marianismo holding you back? And are there opportunities where you can actually empower Marianismo to move you forward? Right? So cultivating that self-awareness, again, it's not right, wrong, bad, good, bad, either or. There's always a duality with it. It's just about how you're using it and being conscious of the ways that you're leveraging that value, especially in the workplace. Number 2 is redefining the Nueva Latina leader. And I got to give a shout out to Dr. Patricia Kanye Brooks and Dr. Damari Bonilla Rodriguez, because both, I didn't actually know this term of Nueva Latina up until either of them have shared it. Dr. Damari actually wrote about this in her dissertation. And if you haven't read her book, she came out with a new book. So I want to make sure that you're familiar with her book and you can get it on Amazon. And then Dr. Patricia last year was actually on a live stream. Her, Dr. Patty Delgado and Alejandra Melky were all on a live stream with me last year. We were talking about self-sabotaging behaviors and collaboration, and just had a really great conversation. And so this topic of the Nueva Latina came up. So what does it mean to define the Nueva Latina? This could be blending some of our Latina or Latino cultural values along with some of the American cultural values. So for example, what it could look like is leaning on qualities like collaboration and empathy that come from Marianismo, but then also blending it with assertiveness and directness. So in this way, we're getting kind of the positive influences from both sides and adapting it to our work environment. And so in some ways, I like to say we're taking the best from both worlds and kind of creating a hybrid. The other thing that you can do is really just practice voicing your needs and setting boundaries. Give yourself permission to say no. The world is not going to end if you say no. One of my friends this week, I talked to her and she was really sick and she felt like she had to go to this obligation. And I kind of questioned her. I said, do you really have to go? Like, what will be the consequence? I mean, like, you don't feel well. Is it going to serve you to go? And the next day she emailed me and she said, you know what? I let my team go for me. I didn't go. And you know what? They did great. They were up to the challenge and I got to rest. So give yourself permission to say no, let go from perfectionism, start to raise your hand in meetings, voice your opinions, practice making requests and asking for what you want. And again, if you don't have the facility of doing that yet, start small, right? Maybe you start by asking for a one-on-one meeting. Maybe you start by asking a question. Maybe you start asking about some time off, whatever it is. Just practice making requests and asking for what you want. And the other thing is finding opportunities for growth and development. It's so important. Keep pursuing educational opportunities, participating in leadership programs, finding mentors, sponsors, coaches, whatever, masterminds. And, if you're a Latina leader who's looking to do some of this, I invite you to reach out to me personally. Again, the link is in my bio, and I'm happy to talk to you about what one-on-one leadership coaching looks like with me. The important thing here is to realize that Marianismo presents both challenges and opportunities for us as Latina leaders. And it can, we have to be aware, it can hinder self-advocacy, it can hinder boundary setting, and it can reinforce gender stereotypes, but it can also offer a unique leadership style that's comes from more of the feminine style, that's rooted in nurturing, that's rooted in empathy, that's rooted in building strong relationships and bonds. And as Latina leaders, it is really crucial for us to embrace our power. It's crucial that we prioritize our self-care. And by self-care, I'm not just talking about getting your hair cut or a massage or manicure, pedicure, or whatever, although I love all those things. But sometimes self-care just means saying no, or putting a boundary in place, or saying, I need time to myself to reset and recharge. We have to be able to advocate for ourselves with the exact same amount of fervor that we champion other people. And so, by cultivating this self-awareness and actively pursuing different growth opportunities, we can really define what it means to be a Nueva Latina leader. So I know we're almost at and I work so hard to keep this within a half-hour day, so we've got a little bit of time left. I want to thank you again for joining into today's discussion. If you have questions, drop them in the chat, and if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and if you want to continue the conversation, I'm going to be talking about boundaries next week. And you can join that live stream, but I want to thank you for being here, and I'll take any questions you have. You can drop them in the chat. Let's see, where is the word coming from? Religious. Yes, it does come from, Marianismo comes from the Virgin Mary. So that's where it comes from. It is a religious term. And there's even a term called Marianista, right? When you're like kind of being like holier than thou. And so that's where it's derived from, is from Catholicism in the church. So it's saying that we ideally should be like the Virgin Mary. So it directly comes from that. A couple books that I also want to recommend. Again, I said Modern Marianismo is a great book that just came out by Dr. Lamani. The other one is very old, very old. You can see it. My my even my cover page fell off because it was an older book that was used that is not in print anymore, but it's called the Maria Paradox. And this was written by two psychologists in 1996 that talked about how Latinas, and they were talking more specifically, I think, about those that came as immigrants that were trying to blend their traditional values with American values and how it impacted their self-esteem. And so there were two psychologists that wrote this book, The Maria Paradox, and it dives way deeper into it. But what's interesting is, again, that this was in 1996, and in rereading this book, it's now 2024, and I can honestly say that not very much has changed at all. And if you've been following me at all, for the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about this Pew Research report that came out that talked about some of the pressures that Latinas have with dual identities as they navigate dual identities. And this is something I was talking about even before the report. And that's a lot about what this Maria Paradox is about, is, how do we blend that and the difficulties that and the internal struggles that we face as we blend our Latino cultural values with, our American cultural values. So that's another really great book. And then the third book that I want to recommend, and this one is not necessarily about Marianismo, but I think it does talk a lot about patriarchy. And it's this one. This is a top 5 book, by the way, for me. It's Break the Good Girl Myth. How to Dismantle Outdated Rules, Unleash Your Power, and Design a More Purposeful Life. I recommend this for every single woman. But, it's important to notice how this is showing up, how this is impacting you in the workplace, and to really put strategies in place to really be able to speak up, to be in your power, to get your needs met. And that's the thing that I want you to take away from this conversation, is that, what you want matters. What you have to say matters. And I want you to have the opportunities in the workplace, because I want all of us to succeed. So, and Camila, the interaction between Marianismo and Machismo again. So they're just gender roles, right? Like Marianismo is the ideal woman and Machismo is the ideal man role, which Machismo also has a dark and light side of it, right? And actually, just to, I'll give you a little sneak preview in about I think maybe in a month from now. I'll let you guys know when it's closer. But I'm actually going to have one of my colleagues come on, and we're going to talk about this conversation in the gender roles from both sides. So I'm going to save that question, Camila, and tell you to come back. I think it's going to be scheduled for mid-July. Refugio Atelano, who wrote the Leadership Playbook, and I are going to have an entire conversation around that. So I'm looking forward to that. Let's see. And Nidia says, thank you for educating us again on topics that are relevant and underrated, but absolutely necessary. How would you suggest to approach the guilt and shame that comes up around not being present and available for those who you would normally prioritize? I'm a first-gen eldest daughter, so it's hard to set boundaries around myself for self-advocacy, since I've always been so involved. It's viewed as selfish. Oh my gosh, Nydia, I can totally relate to that. And believe me, we're going to have an upcoming live stream that's all about eldest daughter syndrome. And I'm not, and the other thing is, next week is Boundaries Are Bonita. So next Wednesday is going to be Boundaries Are Bonita, and I'm going to be talking and answering that exact question. So I want to, I would encourage you to come to that. I think it's a practice, is what I will say for now, that, again, these cultural beliefs are so ingrained and so embedded that we think they're the truth, that we think that they're the only way for us to operate. But we do have choice, and we teach other people how to relate to us. We teach other people what is acceptable to us. And so if we've always done it, people are going to be bothered that all of a sudden you're prioritizing yourself. But I want to say that it is actually a very self-full thing to do, because we need to fill our own cups and then give from the overflow. But if we are just constantly giving, then we don't have anything left for ourselves. And that's why we get burned out, frustrated, sick, have mental health issues, all of those things. So come next week, next Wednesday at 12 o'clock Eastern time, I'll be talking about boundaries are bonita, and I will answer much more of those questions. But thanks for that question. So thank you again. If there's no more questions, if you find yourself struggling with this, need to know how to speak up for yourself, want to know how to set boundaries, want to better understand how to navigate dual identities, reach out to me. The link is in my bio for one-on-one leadership coaching. And I want to thank you all for being here today. And I'll see you next week at Boundaries Are Bonita. Thanks.